So today I'll be speaking about the Chinggisid Mongol lineage. And of course, any discussion about this topic has to start with the man Chinggis Khan himself. So Chinggis Khan was declared the great Khan of the Mongol Empire in the year of 1206 after defeating the Khan of the Naming, which was Tayan Khan at the time. And before this point, he had already absorbed many of the tribes of the Eastern Eurasian steppe, including the Hired, the Ongot, Tatar, Urd, Kyrgyz, and many others. And so because of this, an incredible amount of power had accumulated within the Mongol Empire, and they swiftly started to expand outwards. Now, before I get into the external conquest, let's talk about the origins of Chinggis Khan. He was born in modern-day Mongolia in an area called Dilun Boltag, after his father Isuge had just defeated the Khan of the Tatars, who was Temujin at the time. And so, because of this momentous occasion, Isuge decided to name his son after this Tatar Khan, and he was called Temujin. And as many of you will probably know, his father passed away early on in his life, and Chinggis Khan had to struggle for many decades in order to regain his fallen empire. But after that point, he used his talent in leadership to unite all the nomadic tribes. And when he declared the founding of the Mongol Empire in 1206, he received the title Chinggis Khan, which means many bravery in modern Mongolian. As stated in Rashid ad-Din's collection of chronicles, Ching means brave in Mongolian, and the Gis essentially amplifies the meaning, so it meant many bravery in Mongolian language. And this meaning was very significant at the time, because Chinggis Khan's main contender to the throne and former blood brother was Jamukha. And Jamukha's chosen title was Gur Khan, which also meant bravery. So while Chinggis Khan was many bravery, Gur Khan was a single bravery. And this impetus was one of the main reasons why this name was adopted. So he oversaw the Mongol Empire during its invasion of the Western Shah state, as well as the Jin dynasty, the Khwarezmian Empire, as well as the raids into Eastern Europe and the Kipchak steppe. And during all this, however, he was also a great administrator, and he created many institutions of the steppe that were instrumental in his conquests, one of which includes the Hishktan force, which essentially acted as the elite units of the empire, as well as the main intelligence arm of the state. And he also introduced the Tam system for effective governance of the occupied territories. And he also implemented the decimal system of the nomads, which created highly effective and organized fighting force. So as it states in this chart, Chinggis Khan passed away in the year of 1227, and a second great Khan was chosen in Urd. I'll get to this in detail when we get to Urd's part. So now let's talk about the first son of Chinggis Khan, which is Zuch. So before Zuch's birth, his mother Bushte had been captured by an enemy tribe, but was luckily captured by a tribe that was friendly with Chinggis Khan. And because of this, Bushte was able to be sent back home. On the ride back, Zuch was born, which is why the word Zuch, meaning surprise in the Mongolian language, was given to him as a name. So there is some debate as to whether Zuch was an illegitimate son of Chinggis Khan, but none of that really matters because Chinggis Khan fully accepted and viewed Zuch as a legitimate heir, which is why he was given one of the largest shares of the Mongol Empire upon Chinggis Khan's death. But the interesting thing about this partition is that Zuch never really got to enjoy the position of the Khan of one of the Uluses of the empire, because Zuch Khan actually died several months before Chinggis Khan. He died on the February of 1227, as it states here, while Chinggis Khan died on August of 1227. The first legitimate Khan of the Zuch Ulus was Bat Khan, as I said before, because Zuch was dead by this point. And Bat Khan's lineage would rule the Golden Horde for many generations. Another very interesting lineage of Zuch is that of the Shibanets, which eventually resulted in the rise of Abul Khair Khan. He basically united many of the tribes of Central Asia after the collapse of the Golden Horde and was able to proclaim the formation of the Uzbek Khanate, which is a direct predecessor to the modern country of Uzbekistan. Another interesting Jochid lineage eventually resulted in Nakho Khan, and Nakho actually means dog in the Mongolian language, but it does not carry any negative connotations. As we can see from examples such as Subede being described as Chinggis Khan's loyal dog, dog really just meant someone who was a hard worker and a loyal subject to their king. Many of you will probably know that Nakho Khan rebelled against the Khan of the Golden Horde and subsequently lost his life. Something very interesting about Nakho is that his son Chaka also supported him against the Khan of the Golden Horde, and when Nakho was subsequently defeated, Chaka and his army retreated to modern-day Bulgaria, where Chaka was proclaimed as the Tsar of Bulgaria. Another very interesting lineage from Zuch is that of Tokhtumur, one of which eventually led to Janibek Khan and his trusted partner Kirey, both of which formed the Kazakh Khanate. And the Kazakh Khanate actually declared its independence from Abul Khair Khan of the Uzbeks. Now, another very interesting lineage from Tokhtumur eventually results in the founder of the Crimean Khanate, who is called Khachigaray. And of course, the Crimean Khanate would become one of the most important players in the Black Sea region for many centuries after the formation. Now let's get on to the lineage of Tsagade. So Tsagade was given territory in modern-day Xinjiang and its neighboring regions in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, as well as Afghanistan. And his descendants would continue to rule this region for many, many centuries afterwards. And this is by no means an exhaustive list of the lineage of Tsagade, as there's quite a lot. And by no means is this an exhaustive list of Zuch, Ugote, or any of the others, in fact. I just made sure to highlight some of the interesting people that arose from this lineage, one of which is Tokluk Timur. And he was the founder of a state called Mogolistan in modern-day Xinjiang, after the Tsagade realm had balkanized in the 14th century. And Tokluk Timur's Mogolistan, actually Mogolistan is sort of like an exonym, because inside of the empire, the people just called it Mongol Ulus, which is the same spelling as the Mongol Empire in the Mongolian language. And this is because they actually spoke the Mongolian language until about the 15th century, which is far longer than any of the other post-Chinggisid states, aside maybe from, of course, the Halkh. Now, another very interesting lineage arising from Tsagade is that which led to Babur Khan. And of course, many of you would know, Babur was the founder of the Mughal Empire, which is just a Persianized spelling of the word Mongol. Now, let's get on to the lineage of Ugote. So as I said, Ugote was the second great Khan of the empire, and his rule is often seen as a prosperous and peaceful time in Mongol history. There was no big civil wars, and many of the different lineages all accompanied him in his conquests. So Ugote oversaw the final destruction of the Jin dynasty, as well as the invasion into the Kipchak steppe, the Rus principalities, and Eastern Europe. And it is quite significant because in these invasions, all of the lineages of Chinggis Khan were included, and they all got along relatively fine. So after the death of Ugote Khan in 1241, Guyuk, his firstborn, became the Great Khan. And you can see that there was a delay of about 5 years after the death of Ugote to the coronation of Guyuk. And this was because there was significant strife within the Mongol Empire because of Guyuk Khan's contention and disagreements with Bat Khan. And these disagreements mainly arose because Guyuk Khan refused to accept Bat Khan's seniority and suzerainty when the Mongols invaded Russia. And this was mainly because Guyuk did not recognize Zuch as a legitimate son of Chinggis, and so believed that Bat was also not legitimate. So Guyuk Khan oversaw the Mongol Empire for only 2 years, and this was not too momentous, but he did create some administrative reforms as well as gains in the Caucasus, I believe. And one of the more interesting lineages of Ugote was that of Khadu Khan. And Khadu was the de facto leader of the Tsagada Hantos, the Chagatai Khanate, until 1301, which is quite interesting. I may make a separate video on Khadu Khan in the future if you guys are interested. Now, I also made sure to include Urgun Tumur Khan, which was the king of the Khalq from 1402 to 1408, because a lot of historians believe that Ugaydid lineage basically fell into obscurity after the death of Khadu Khan, and I just included this to show that this is not true, and he was the king of the Khalq for about 6 years. Now then, let's get to one of the most important lineages, Tolui. As this chart shows, Tolui was the fourth son of Chinggis Khan, and after Chinggis Khan's death, Tolui was given the area of modern-day Mongolia and its neighboring regions. And what's more interesting is that he was given 101,000 of the about 120,000 army of the Mongols at the time. And Tolui's name actually means mirror in Mongolian, and it is said that after Tolui's death, the Mongols stopped using the Mongolian word and used a Turkic alternative instead. So Tolui was the father of Munk Khan, Hulegu Khan, Khoble, and Erigbukh. And as it states here, Munk Khan was the fourth great Khan of the Mongol Empire after the death of Guig. This was mainly because of Munk Khan's alliance with Bat Khan. At the point of Guig's death, Bat Khan was actually one of the most senior members of the Golden Lineage at the time. And he was in fact offered the position of the Great Khan, but he refused and chose to support Munk Khan in his campaign instead. And so Munk Khan subsequently became the Great Khan of the Mongol Empire. And he oversaw gains in the Middle East through the final destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire, as well as the invasion of the Song dynasty, which was not fully completed at this time. So Hulegu Khan is one of the sons of Tolui, and he was the one that invaded the Middle East. And his magnum opus is probably the siege of Baghdad and the fall of Baghdad to his army. And of course, after the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire, Hulegu and his descendants created the Ilkhantos, which ruled Iran, Iraq, and eastern Turkey for a few centuries or two. Now let's get to the lineage of Kublai Khan. As it states here, Kublai was the sixth great Khan of the Mongol Empire and the founder of the Yuan dynasty. And if you look here, Erigbukh is the fifth great Khan. And there is a lot of contention as to whether Erik was in fact the great Khan or not. But Mongolian historians believe that he was the great Khan, because unlike Kublai, who created the Khoreltai for his election in northern China, Erigbukh followed the traditional route, and his supporting nobles all coalesced in modern-day Mongolia, as was decreed by Chinggis Khan. And Erigbukh and Kublai subsequently had a civil war which Kublai won, and there was few main reasons why Kublai won as opposed to Erigbukh. And this was because since Munk Khan died in southern China, a large majority of the Mongol army was located in southern China, which Kublai took control over, while Erigbukh did not enjoy this leverage. And Kublai had the support of the nobles of China, so he could pull far more resources and population from this land. And this is largely why all the subsequent emperors of the Yuan dynasty were descendants of Kublai. But eventually, a farmers' rebellion pushed out the Mongols from China, and Togon Timur Khan was the last of the Yuan Khans to fully control China. When he was beaten, he was pushed back to modern Mongolia, and his son Ayush Ridar Khan recreated the court in Karakorum, or Kharkhorum in modern Mongolia, which was the historic capital of the empire under Ugoda Khan, Guig Khan, and all the others actually. And this lineage eventually resulted in Ligdeng Khan, who was the last king of the Khalq Mongols, who reigned from 1604 to 1634. And at this time, Manchurians had annexed the southern Mongol states, and Ligdeng Khan adamantly opposed this intrusion to his power and fought several battles against the Manchu until he lost, and the Khalq Mongols were incorporated into the Qing dynasty. Now, this very interesting lineage goes from Erikbuch to Isudr Khan, who was the Khan of the northern Yuan Mongols from 1688 to 1634. And I also just made sure to include this lineage to show that the descendants of Erikbuch also enjoyed positions of power and were the head of state for multiple points. Now, some of you may see that at this point the name of the nation of the country changes from northern Yuan Mongols to the Khalq Mongols. To explain this discrepancy, after the Mongols were pushed back from China, they eventually adopted the name Khalq because Yuan was actually a Chinese title and had no real meaning in Mongolian, and so they chose to call themselves Khalq, which means protection or shield in Mongolian. Now, as a side note, some of you may be thinking why I made sure to include the Mongolian characters of all the relevant characters on this list. And I mainly did this because Chinggis Khan decreed that, approved by the eternal blue sky, awarded to the blue Mongols, spread the jewel that is the Mongol script to the people and state alike. He basically proclaimed it as the state script and writing system, so I thought it would be very fitting for this list. So thank you for watching.